Hey guys, I hope everything's going well for you. Today we are going to start a read aloud for the short story The Test by Angelica Gibb. One thing that we should know about the text before we read is that this was written in 1940. So it is historical. So even if it's written in present day, it's not right now, it's 1940, quite a long time ago. So that's something to sort of keep in mind. As we read, I am going to do annotations that will help me understand what I'm reading. I'm going to focus on the things that I normally would focus on during any read. I'm going to point out the things that I think are kind of weird, the things that I'm wondering, why did the author put that in the story? I'm also going to maybe look at vocabulary words or some ideas that you might not be familiar with. Um, all right, that's about it. Let me go ahead and get started with this read aloud. On the afternoon Marian took her second driver's test, Mrs. Erickson went with her. "It's probably better to have someone a little older with you," Mrs. Erickson said as Marian slipped into the driver's seat beside her. "Perhaps the last time your cousin Bill made you nervous, talking too much on the way." "Yes, ma'am," Miriam said in her soft, unaccented voice. "They probably do like it better if a white person shows up with you." Okay, so right away, I feel like this is weird. I think it is odd that they're mentioning that her voice is unaccented. Like, I don't see the point really. Why? Uh, Normally, when they mention an accent, they would be saying something like, oh, her soft Indian accent, something like that. I've never seen any text tell me that a voice is completely unaccented. I don't see the purpose of that. So I'm hoping that I will understand as I read. Okay, I'm gonna continue on. She said, "They probably do like it better if a white person shows up with you." So Marion's not a white person. "Oh, I don't think it's that," Mrs. Erickson began, and quieted after a glance at the girl's set profile. Marion drove the car slowly through the shady suburban streets. It was one of the first hot days in June, and when she reached the boulevard they found it crowded with cars headed for the beaches. "Do you want me to drive?" Miss Erickson asked. "I'll be glad to if you're feeling jumpy." Marian shook her head. Mrs. Erickson watched her dark, competent hands and wondered for the thousandth time how the house had ever managed to get along without her, or how she had lived through those earlier years when her household had been presided over by a series of untidy white girls who considered housework demeaning and the care of children added insult. "You drive beautifully, Marian," she said. "Now, don't think of the last time. Anybody would slide on a steep hill on a wet day like that." "It takes 4 mistakes to flunk you," Marian said. "I don't remember doing all the things the inspector marked down on my score sheet." "People say they only want you to slip them a little something," Mrs. Erickson said doubtfully. "What is that?" "People say they only want you to slip 'em a little something. Oh, maybe money, I guess." "No," Marian said. "That would make it worse, Mrs. Erickson." "I know." The car turned right at the traffic signal into a side road and slid to the curb at the rear of a short line of parked cars. The inspectors had not yet arrived. "You got the papers?" Mrs. Erickson asked. Marian took them out of her bag. Her learner's permit, the car registration, and her birth certificate. They settled down to the dreary business of waiting. "It will be marvelous to have someone dependable to drive the children to school every day," Mrs. Erickson said. Marian looked up from the list of driving requirements she had been studying. "It'll make things simpler at the house, won't it?" she said. "Oh, Marian," Mrs. Erickson exclaimed, "if only I could pay you half of what you're worth." "Now, Mrs. Erickson," Marian said firmly, They looked at each other and smiled with affection. Two cars with official insignia on the doors stopped across the street. The inspectors leaped out, very briskly and military in their neat uniforms. Marian's hand tightened on the wheel. "There's the one who flunked me last time," she whispered, pointing to a stocky, self-important man who had begun to shout directions at the driver at the head of the line. "Oh, Mrs. Erikson." "Now, Marian," Mrs. Erikson said. They smiled at each other again, rather weakly. The inspector who finally reached their car was not the stocky one, but a cheerful, middle-aged man who grunted broadly as he thumbed over their papers. Mrs. Erikson started to get out of the car. "Don't you want to come along?" the inspector asked. "Mandy and I don't mind." Mrs. Erikson was bewildered for a moment. "No," she said, and stepped to the curb. "I might make Marian self-conscious. She's a fine driver, Inspector." "Sure thing," the inspector said, winking at Mrs. Erikson. He slid into the seat beside Marian. "Right. Turn at the corner, Mandy Lou." Okay, so twice this dude has called her Mandy Lou. Why is he doing that? I don't understand. That is not her name. Her name is Marian. So, okay. From the curb, Mrs. Erikson watched the car move smoothly up the street. The inspector made notations in a small black book. "Age?" he inquired presently as they drove along. 27. He looked at Marian out of the corner of his eye. "Old enough to have quite a flock of pickaninnies, eh?" Marian did not answer. Okay. Pickaninnies. Pickaninnies is a slur. This is a racial slur, and it's not something I have a question about, so I'm going to highlight it differently. But this racial slur is, what it means is a small black child. And I'll just write racial slur. So, I mean, this is something he's saying that is going to be pretty offensive. So I'm assuming that he is a racist dude. There, I fixed my comment. That wasn't working for me. And it's not highlighted anymore. Try to highlight that. All right, sorry about that. So I'm going to move on. A flock, that's probably going to mean quite a few. So he's saying you probably have a whole bunch of black kids. It's kind of messed up. She's only 27. That's not reasonable. Okay. "Left at this corner," the inspector said, "and park between the truck and the green Buick." The two cars were very close together, but Marian squeezed in between them without too much maneuvering. "Driven before, Mandy Lou?" the inspector asked. "Yes, sir. I had a license for 3 years in Pennsylvania." "Why do you want to drive a car?" "My employer needs me to take her children to and from school." "Sure you don't really want to sneak out nights to meet some young boy?" Wow. All right. "Sure you don't really want to sneak out nights to meet some young boy?" the inspector asked. He laughed as Marian shook her head. "Let's see you take a left at the corner and then turn around in the middle of the next block," the inspector said. He began to whistle Swanee River. "Make you homesick?" he asked. All right. Swanee River it's a song from the South. It's thought of today to be quite a racist song. Song from the South, kind of racist. All right. So he's asking her if this racist song makes her feel homesick. Marian put out her hand, swung around neatly in the street, and headed back in the direction from which they had come. "No," she said, "I was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania." The inspector feigned astonishment. "You all ain't Southern?" he said. "Well, dog my cats, if I didn't think you all came from down yonder." "No, sir," Marian said. "Turn onto Main Street and let's see how you all do in heavier traffic." They followed a line of cars along Main Street for several blocks until they came in sight of a concrete bridge which arched high over the railroad tracks. "Read that sign at the end of the bridge," the inspector said. "Proceed with caution. Dangerous in slippery weather." "You all sho can read fine," the inspector exclaimed. "Where do y'all learn to do that, Mandy?" "I got my college degree last year," Marian said. Her voice was not quite steady. As the car crept up the slope of the bridge, the inspector burst out laughing. He laughed so hard he could scarcely give his direction. All right. Why? If I read a little bit more, it says, "Stop here," he said, wiping his eyes, then start her up again. "Mandy got her degree, did she? Dog my cats." He is super rude. Why is this inspector being so rude about the fact that she has a college degree? All right. There's a reason that the author chose to add that into the text. Okay, and I will just highlight that. Okay. Marian pulled up beside the curb. She put the car in neutral, pulled on the emergency brake, waited a moment, and then put the car into gear again. Her face was set. As she released the brake, her foot slipped off the clutch pedal and the engine stalled. "Now, Mistress Mandy," the inspector said, "remember your degree." "Damn you!" Marian cried. She started the car with a jerk. The inspector lost his cheerful demeanor in an instant. "Return to the starting place, please," he said, and made 4 very black crosses at random on the squares on Marian's application blank. Mrs. Erikson was waiting at the curb where they had left her. As Marian stopped the car, the inspector jumped out and brushed past her, his face purple. "What happened?" Mrs. Erikson asked, looking after him with alarm. Marian stared down at the wheel, and her lip trembled. "Oh, Marian, again?" Mrs. Erikson asked. Marian nodded. "In a sort of different way," she said, and slid over to the other side of the car. All right. That's going to be it for our read aloud today. We will talk more about the annotations that I made during our lessons. Thanks, guys.